Hi, I'm Kate and welcome to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about all of the palettes that I used in the month of April. So a few reasons behind wanting to do this. First, I like eyeshadow palette content, so why not make more of it? Second, I'm trying to track just month by month. I started with April, I didn't do it earlier this year, but tracking my palette usage, I think that'll help at the end of the year as I do another declutter to see, what have I not dipped into at all? What am I using more often? Like, are there things that I can get rid of in my collection? So hoping it'll just help with that a little bit, but it's also fun to kind of look back and see what I used a lot of. I'm gonna start by just talking about the palettes that I only used once, which is most things. I did do makeup every single day in April, which a lot of months I feel like there's weekend days that I just skip it. But for some reason in April, I have a look for every single day. My look today is one of the palettes that I only used once this month because today was the first day that I had it. I got it yesterday for my birthday, and this is the Nomad Paradise Islands palette. It's a beautiful, beautiful palette. Look at that. I did a green and kind of pinky orange look today. I anticipate that I'll see this a lot more in May because it's new to me and I plan on using it quite a bit at the start of the month here. So I used this palette one time this month. Another palette that I dipped into one time this month is from Black Moxie. This is the Potion palette, another beautiful palette. So I use this to do a lot of neutral looks. I think the look I did with this, I used more of the neutrals, I dipped into the black, and then I used some Black Moxie singles on top of it, but I used this one time this month. All right, my next one-time use palette is the Glaminatrix Silent Night. I used this for my birthday makeup a couple days ago. I'll try to post looks up here too. I think it's fun to share what I did with these palettes, but I love this palette, especially the shade Baubles down here. If you look at my Instagram, I have quite a few swatches and close-ups with this shade. It is one of my favorites, but I used this palette one time this month. Like I said, most palettes I only used once. I do have a few things that I used 3+ times. We're gonna save those for the end. Another palette used once is the Nomad Whistler palette. You're gonna see a few Nomad palettes on this list. Another beautiful, beautiful palette. The brand sent this to me a couple months ago and I love it. I love every look that I do with this. A lot of variety, but I did use this one time. An oldie but goodie that I dipped into one time this month is the Naked Honey palette from Urban Decay. I love this palette. I love the tones in here. The mattes just blend out so beautifully. You just get the most beautiful golden honey looks. Not a lot of variety in this palette, but if I want something honey and golden, this is definitely what I dip into. One of the newer palettes to my collection is the Moira Let's Get Carried Away palette. I did use this one time this month. Now this is a palette with a lot of great variety. You have a lot of blues, you have a lot of warm tones. The shimmers are really pretty. So I used this one time. Another newer palette to my collection that I used once this month is the Fantasy Cosmetica Druid palette. I did a look with this and I think I topped it with some Beauty Bar Baby Flakies, which was a really fun look. This is just a stunning palette, perfect for fall. I anticipate getting a lot more use out of this in the fall, but it's another good one. I used the Natasha Denona Safari palette, also one time this month. Another favorite of mine, this is an all matte palette, but I love it. Natasha has beautiful shadows and this palette is no exception. All right, we're still on the one-use palettes. So another one I used this month is the BH Lost in LA palette. Just a perfect springy palette. I'm sure as it gets like closer to fall, I won't dip into it as much, but maybe in the next month or so I'll try to pull it out a little bit more. All right, I have a couple more Nomad palettes that I dipped into once. So I have the America's Parks palette that I used once this month. Another beautiful one, especially the greens and some of these warm tones. They are just fantastic. And probably my favorite Nomad palette, the Iceland palette. I also used this one time this month. This is probably my favorite of all of my Nomad palettes. It's also the first one that I ever got, so love it. From ColourPop, I used That's Taupe. This is just a really simple, pretty cool tone palette. It's a really great one. Probably one of my favorite ColourPop palettes, just because I don't have a lot of these taupey tones, but there's that one too. Another Natasha Denona palette that I used one time this month is the Sunrise palette. This is one of her midi-sized palettes. This is a beautiful palette. This is the only midi-sized palette of hers that I have, but lots of beautiful berry tones, some really pretty golden shades. So I also love this one. I used the Huda Mercury Retrograde palette one time this month. This made it in like my if I could keep 10 palettes. I absolutely love this palette. I like the variety you can get with it. The shadows perform beautifully. I think my last one-time use palette this month was the Tartlet from Tarte. Just a beautiful all matte neutral palette. I did top it with some Glaminatrix shimmers. but these mattes are just some of the best in my collection. This is fantastic. I have 3 palettes that I used 3 times each. So first up is the Black Moxie Pastel Obsessions palette. Black Moxie is easily one of my favorite current brands. I love her palettes, I love her singles. I have another palette on the way, the Boundless Blooms. I'm excited to get and use that. But I did do 3 looks with this palette. I think one of them I never actually posted. It was kind of a crazy like graphic liner with flowers. I'll post it up here. Not something I would probably wear out, but still really fun. But I love this palette. I love the variety. I love how pigmented these are for being pastel shades. This is just one of my favorites. I think this also made it into my if I could only keep 10 palettes. All right, another 3-use palette this month is the Glamlight and Michaela palette. So easily one of my favorite palettes. You have beautiful pastel springy tones, but they're super pigmented. The shimmers in here are stunning and super sparkly. You do have some really beautiful neutrals as well. I've used this a lot since I've gotten it. I used it a lot, especially last summer when I first got it, but I still dip into this pretty often, as you can see, 3 times this month. I still love this one. All right, a palette that I'm guessing will probably be on this list most months is the Blend Bunny Surge palette. This was my top palette of 2021, another one that I would keep if I could only keep 10. Probably my current favorite palette in my collection. I mean, you have some pastel shades, some kind of mid-tone, super beautiful deep rich mattes and neons. The shimmers in here are awesome as well. I used this 3 times. And the winner for me for the month isn't necessarily like a plain palette, but it's a collection of singles that I dipped into 6 times this month. This is my palette of Terra Moon's shadows, and this is my collection of Terra Moons. So I have all my mattes over here, all of my shimmers over here. Terra Moon's shadows are just top notch. The mattes are super pigmented, but they blend really beautifully, and the shimmers are just super unique. I'm not gonna swatch any here. I have a lot of swatches of them on my Instagram, but I dipped into this 6 times, probably mostly this new spring collection, which is this row of mattes right here, and then these 2 shimmers, just to get use out of their new products, because I did grab seven of their new spring collection shadows. And then I dipped into some of their other shadows for my other looks, but I did use my Terra Moon's shadows 6 times this month. Thank you so much for watching my April palette usage. I don't know if this will be interesting to anyone else. It's more, like I said, just for me to kind of keep track and make sure that I'm getting use out of my collection and knowing what I can get rid of and pass along at the end of the year. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.